My name is Laura Runge. I'm the chair of the English department. We are one of the three departments, well, collaborating with actually two departments, collaborating with the library to sponsor the Digital Humanities Summer Institute membership that we have as an institution. And the presentations that we're having today, and there'll be two more panels later on this semester, are part of our effort to give back to the institution for sponsoring these participants at the DHSI. So DHSI is a long-standing Digital Humanities Summer Institute run out of the University of Victoria in British Columbia. I'm trying to remember. I'm doing this all off the top of my head now. They run 2 weeks every June, where people who have been working in digital humanities offer courses in their specialties. And they have different levels of courses. So they have the introductory levels, and then for those who want more, there are more advanced skills that you can learn at this institute. Today we had two people who it was their first time out at DHSI, and they took the digital storytelling and also the digital sounds workshops. And they're going to tell you what they learned. The idea here is to wet your whistle, get you interested in the skills and tools that we use in digital humanities, and to have a discussion about how you might use these yourself. So come on in. First we're going to have Allyson Hoffman. Allyson Hoffman is a third-year MFA in fiction in the English department, and she's going to present on sounds and stories, sort of combining both of them together. I had the opportunity to see one of her digital poems at DHSI, and literally brought me to tears. So that's all I'm saying. It's good stuff. So welcome, Allyson.
And we are recording this, so if you haven't already, please mute your phones.
Our phones are muted? Thank you, Dr. Runge.
You're welcome.
And so I wanted to thank the Department of English for sponsoring me and allowing me to go to DHSI. I can't praise the program enough. I'm also grateful to DHSI. I was able to earn a scholarship and go for both weeks. So 2 weeks in Victoria, Canada is a beautiful experience, as you can see. As I go through, if you have questions and I don't answer them, my email address is available here. I'm happy to respond to your questions. I'm happy to talk to you about digital storytelling and using sounds in the stories that we're telling. So, to get started, looking at this gorgeous image again, thinking about the stories that we might tell, what's going on in here? Or what story might you imagine in this image? What sounds, what images come to your mind? We have a beautiful setting. You might be walking down the beach. You might be in the water. Then you have all the sensory details. You might see the bird in the sky. You feel the wind, the ocean spray on your face. You hear the ocean. If you're walking down this beach though, are you really thinking about actually recording the sounds? How many of you would be doing that? But you totally can. So not only could you write an essay, you totally can do this. Not only would you be writing an essay potentially about your experiences in this place, you could use sounds to enhance that sort of essay, which is exactly what I'm up to next. That's my next project, is recording waters around North America and the stories that take place there. So that combination of inviting you to Victoria with me, along with the text. So that's what we could be up to with sounds and stories. Today I'm going to offer you 3 major points. The first is going to be about stories. So what kind of stories are we telling when we're doing digital storytelling? Then I'm going to talk about how we might capture sound. And then finally offer some digital tools and resources for teachers. So, as you can see on this handout, if you're able to grab the handout, thinking about stories, the most important part of digital storytelling is the story itself, right? So we go into digital storytelling thinking about the stories that we want to tell. That's not necessarily just creative writing stories. I'm also looking at journalists, historians, anthropologists, anyone who's telling a story. We have all the good craft elements, as you can see on the side. We have a process. We plan our stories first. We think about good storytelling skills. We think about characters and tension. All of that comes together before we even pick what tools we're going to use. Then we produce it. Then we look at all of the great tools that I have to offer you later on. We figure out how we're going to tell our stories. We ask ourselves these questions that I've offered you up at the top here. For example, What experiences would you like your audience to have? My example that I just gave to you on my beach, I want you to come to the beach with me. That's really important to me to engage my audience. I have a smaller example, as Dr. Runge mentioned, from DHSI. I was working on a poem for, 3 or 4 years, and it wasn't landing the way that I wanted it to. So what I did was I used this tool called Stepworks. And for those of you who were here earlier, you got to see just a little clip of what Stepworks can do, can move text and pair it with sound. So really quick for Hamilton fans, just the intro here.
How does it best form the sun of a pool when the Scots drop to the blue of a spot?
So you get the idea of how the text can move along with the sound at the same time. This is all coded in a Google Sheet. Whoa, it's really interesting. That small, the way the text is able to move, you're capable of doing it too. So the project that I was working on, this poem, the questions that I was asking myself, how can I have the audience participate in my poem? I felt like I was missing that element with my audience. I was wondering how I can make the audience feel the dissonance and the unsteadiness that my speaker is feeling in the poem. So this is what happened. I made an interactive poem. Up here, I'm going to be the reader as well as the speaker right now. But I'm clicking the Enter tab. And as I click, the text comes on the screen. I click again, more text. Text is moving, and we hear sound that I've paired with it as well. So I coded that all in the Google Sheets. As we keep going, it's not quite clear to the audience when they're supposed to click and when they're not. We have to hesitate, we have to wait, it's uncomfortable. That's kind of the experience I was going for here. This is a very long poem. I'm not going to run through the whole thing with you, but I'm happy to share a link or work with you individually if you're interested in learning more about Stepworks. So that's just one of the many possibilities and showing you my process for creating a piece like that. The next part that I promised to tell you is how are we going to capture sound? Most of you have a device available right now to capture sounds. How many of you have your cell phones on you? There you go, that's all you need, honestly. Those recording apps that you have on your phone, those work really well. When I was walking down the beach, just held out my phone. The recordings that I have worked out really well. So, when we think about recording sound, we want to think about capturing sounds that we wouldn't be able to recreate elsewhere. So if you're thinking about your story, you're thinking about the sounds that you want to pair with that, what won't you be able to capture again? What won't you be able to get elsewhere? We're not all going to be able to take off and go to DHSI today. So I actually put together what we'll call a soundscape for you, so you get a little taste of that experience. A soundscape is a project that you might be able to introduce to your students. A soundscape is a story just out of sounds, layered together to tell a story. I'll play my soundscape of DHSI for you, and then I'll talk through my process of building that. Sound good? I realized that was pretty faint, but I'll try to talk through the different layers that I'm working with here. Again, thinking about the story that I wanted to start with, the story that I had in my mind way before I even started sound, picking up the sound. The story I wanted to tell is, what does DHSI sound like? And the thread that kept running through my mind was typing. Everyone is working all the time, at all hours of the day. So the story that I tell, we begin with typing, we end with typing, and that's the undercurrent of the whole piece. Then I thought, what other elements do I want to incorporate? And this might be an exercise you just start brainstorming. You make a list of all the things that you might be hearing. So I was fortunate enough to be there for 2 weeks. So I was able to make pretty lengthy list and I recorded a lot of different things. So what you heard were my peers in my different classes, the chattering, if you were able to hear that. You also heard the city bus, which I rode to campus. You heard of the unlocking and locking of the Airbnb door, because that was part of my process, that personal experience that I wanted to invite you in to be a part of. And then applause, because we got to listen to really fantastic presentations throughout the whole time. So those are the elements that I was working with together for that particular soundscape. And of course you can make them a lot longer. You might be able to make them more interactive. We can talk about that when we talk about different tools. So, the last element that I wanted to bring for you today is the opportunity to incorporate this in your own projects and in your classrooms. So some of you have already approached me and said, how do we bring digital storytelling into the classrooms? And the first thing I'll point you right back to the handout is the story. We must begin with good storytelling practices, having our students focus on the research first and the way that they're going to present the story maybe textually, and then we add the digital component. If we have a good story, then we can elevate it and engage with our audiences. So if I were to teach the students, I would have them think about the purpose of the digital tools and who their intended audience might be. So audience and purpose. Then, if I were to introduce different platforms to students, I might get them started with just a brief overview, showing them, as I did, StepWorks, and the StepWorks video, look at what the possibilities are, without going into too much detail of how to do that. Letting students teach themselves, figure out what's most interesting to them. So you as an instructor, you don't have to learn all of the details of every single tool your students use. In fact, you could learn from your students. So one of my suggestions for an activity might be for students to pick a particular tool that they're interested in, research it heavily, and then teach it back to their peers, whatever they might be most interested in or whatever could support their projects. So, another project that you might consider would be podcasting. That's something that students might be more familiar with. It incorporates the sound and allows you to use tools that they might be more familiar with, such as GarageBand. That's where I made the soundscape. And sometimes it sounds like, oh, we need to use really high-tech tools. Not necessary. Some things are already installed in your computer that allow you to make really cool projects. So I have a short list for you here at the bottom. StepWorks, of course, is my favorite, as you saw with the poem. But I also really enjoy some of these other ones. These are personal favorites, not necessarily anything that you might know, but I have offered you the URL to my professor's website, who taught both of my courses, the digital storytelling and the sounds in the digital humanities, Dr. John Barber. And his website is a trove of tools. So I'd be happy to send that around to those of you who visited today. But essentially, he's got quick links for you here, depending on what kind of stories you want to tell or what kind of work you want to do. So if you wanted to do augmented reality, he has a list of opportunities for you here. Comics, I know I have some comics people in here. There's a bunch going on here. So I'm just going to show you a couple of my favorites, but this resource is available to you as well. And sometimes just doing simple searches or looking at other scholarship that has already been successful might inspire you to find other tools. So very quickly, Twine is an open source tool for telling nonlinear stories. This is a personal favorite of mine, and the example I have here is Stephen Colbert, who has used Twine to tell a quick story. So you follow the directions. Congratulations, you're Stephen Colbert. You were wandering to the office because your show doesn't start for 2 months and they won't let you drive go-karts inside anymore. So then we have options. I, as the reader, get to interact with the text here. I can either click on the man-sized cabinet or I can explore the man-sized cabinet. Should I explore the man-sized cabinet?
Yes.
Are you sure you don't want to see the rest of the office?
Positive.
We're positive. Right, you're already engaged. You already want to come play with this, right? So I won't go too far into this, but that's a quick search, Stephen Colbert, Twine. Fantastic resource. So if you wanted your students to tell stories in that way, that's an option for them as well. My other favorite is History Pin, which allows students to create a neighborhood with pinned locations using images. So this might be a good archival type project. So they pin on the map different images, different sound files, different resources with text below those. So that's just a handful of my personal favorites, but I'm happy to talk through others if you have particular questions. But I want to make sure we get to Spencer's. Did you have a question in the back?
Yeah, I just love everything you're doing, so I'm writing everything down frantically. I mainly had a question about kind of what you think the skill set has to be for the students to use some of these tools. So like for StepWorks or Twine, GarageBand, some of those, like how, if I want to do it in an intro to lit class with students who say they don't know anything about technology.
That might even be better. If they don't know anything about technology, then I direct students to YouTube. There's so many fantastic YouTube resources. They can watch a YouTube video in 10 minutes, which is literally how I taught myself StepWorks. 10-minute YouTube video, coded this whole thing. Pretty cool. It makes it sound like I did no work. I did a lot of work, actually. But to get started, only takes that 10-minute investment.
So you feel like they are easily integrated into the class, those tools are easily integrated into the classroom?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Why don't we save more conversation until after we have Pierre Spencer, because he also did visual storytelling, so we want to hear what he has to say.
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. So Spencer Bennington is a second-year PhD in the Rhetoric and Composition program in the English department, and also a first-time goer to the DHSI. And he, as I've already mentioned, did the visual storytelling the digital storytelling as well. And I'd be interested to hear how he's incorporated it into his own disciplinary background. So welcome, Spencer.
Yay. All right, so my handout looks a little different. Ta-da! In keeping with the digital part of what we're doing here, I decided that maybe a good way to share and collaborate might be via Google Doc. Also, I can't make things look this beautiful, so when I saw Allyson's, I was like, well, all right, I'm gonna give up on that. So what I'm passing around is just a sheet if you would like to share resources or see some of my suggestions for some of the things that I've come across, which there are a lot of tools available for you. Just write down your name and your email, and I will be sure to share the doc, and maybe this will encourage future collaborations for people that are interested in doing some projects like this. So there you go. Now, where's my window? Here we go.
Okay, you're
I have to
muted.
use this thing?
Just hit DP mute.
Oh my gosh.
There you go.
All
Digital
right.
tools.
I'm going to be a prima donna too. I want the lights off here, so do I hit this?
Um,
This one?
actually, probably,
John?
there you go.
Oh wow, now it's really dark.
Ooh.
And what about volume? This too?
That's as loud as it gets.
It's the other they practiced it.
Yeah,
See,
I'm
'cause
sorry.
I've got a really fun example to show you, so I hope you can hear it. If not, watch by yourself. Okay, so digital storytelling and specifically impacts on writing pedagogy. As Dr. Runge mentioned, I'm studying rhetoric and composition, and even though I have a background in storytelling and creative writing, I need to focus my attention more now on things like first year composition, which is great. FYC, where you at? Woo! Right? And just writing in general, I've always been a big believer, is a form of storytelling, right? No matter how you slice it. So I think my big takeaway is that a lot of the concepts we learned in this seminar are applicable no matter if you're teaching a Lit 2000, if you're teaching E&C 1101, creative writing courses, it doesn't matter. There's something here for you. So before I get started, I do want to echo what Allyson said and say thank you to the English department for sending me to this wonderful experience, and to all of the DH community here, because when I came to USF, Dr. Jones probably remembers this story. I had never heard of the phrase of digital humanities, and so it's been a learning curve for me. But this is a very welcoming community, and even more so at DHSI. And that was one of the things that it really impacted me. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. So I'm going to ask a few questions today. Right? What exactly is DHSI? I imagine that many of you here are interested in hearing more about that and potentially going, since we are talking about this wonderful opportunity we took advantage of. I'd like to encourage, especially the grad students in the room, to be considering this for next year, because it is something that can really benefit you. And then furthermore, what about digital storytelling? I see some MFAs here that probably have a pretty comfortable grip on what storytelling is, but what does it mean when we make it digital, right? And finally, how can the core concepts of digital storytelling extend into our teaching practices, regardless of what classroom we find ourselves in? So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. As Allyson said, DHSI, what is it? It's beautiful. Victoria, this was my first time in Canada, and Victoria was amazing. What a beautiful place to get to spend a week at the Digital Humanities Summer Institute. And so, to sort of set the stage, you show up for a week and you get to be a student again, right? This isn't a conference where you're expected to grandstand or show off or try and be the smartest, best person in the room. You get to hang out with people that are interested in learning new things and sharing new ideas. So that was very refreshing. And like I said, a very wonderful environment. Now, you may be saying, what kinds of concepts and new skills can I learn? Well, the sky's the limit. This is just a fraction of some of the seminars that are being offered because the list is already up for the 2018,
Yes,
right?
it is. And registration is open for institutions like our own.
Exactly. So get the ball rolling, right? And you'll notice, bam, John Barber, digital storytelling, he's there again. He's back with a vengeance. It's a very popular course. So if this is something that you find yourself interested in, you should start looking into it now. But, you know, you'll see all sorts of other things. Building your academic digital identity, queer digital humanities, intersections, interrogations, iterations. The spectrum of what's covered at DHSI is quite wide. And then here's some more fun pictures that people love taking of the back of my head. But what is DHSI? Well, it's a place to network and meet new colleagues from all over the world. I mean, we had various countries and regions represented just in our small classroom alone. So it was a very fascinating cultural experience, as well as a great opportunity to network with people in various disciplines. And more pictures, because it's a great place to explore, right? I can't emphasize enough just how beautiful Victoria is. So even if you're still on the fence about digital humanities or storytelling or even any of that, go check it out. It's going to be worth your time. So that leads us into, wondering what exactly is digital storytelling, right? I don't know. Well, John Barber says that it's story first, right? And again, Allyson has mentioned this, that, digital storytelling might be a misnomer because it sort of primes us to think that it's a special, slice of storytelling, and it's not. It's a way to reconceptualize the core foundations of what it means to tell a story, right? And a way for us to use the new tools and technologies that are available to us to tell the stories in the most effective ways that we can. So what's a story? Well, Socrates, or Aristotle, I forget who I put here now because it's been a long day, tells us that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And this notion was then later complicated by Freytag's pyramid, something that we probably taught many of our students before, the idea of an exposition with rising action, a climax, and a denouement, right? Sound familiar so far? Mm-hmm. Right? So then the question is, okay, if that's a story, how do we digitize it? As I mentioned, digital storytelling encourages us to ask, what are the best strategies to achieve the desired effect on our audience? So, if we're looking at a model like this, if we're looking at a model like this, how do we best convey the emotionality or the conflict of a climax, right? Is it strictly textual? Well, it used to be because that was the available medium. But perhaps in the stories we wish to tell, sound is the most appropriate way to illustrate a climax, like a car crash, right? Shattering glass, that particular sound. But humans have access to an entire range of ways to know about the world, and digital storytelling allows us to tap into different sensations and different ways of knowing. I included this, I really like, this is a resource that will be in the doc if you choose to add yourself to the Spencer Bennington newsletter archive stream of digital resources. Damon Knight's short fiction is a book that I really like, and this is a model that I use a lot to explain to my students how stories operate and the sort of dynamism and interplay in a plot. So this is what he calls the tentpole method. So forget theme for a second. These are our 4 tent poles: character, setting, emotion, and conflict. And Knight argues that these 4 concepts are what hold up the plot of a story. And like a tent, it's the connection between the poles and the tension between the poles that actually create a structure. And so once we establish these 4 things and how they interact with each other, you raise the final center tent pole of theme. That's what emerges from the interplay of these 4 ideas. So again, what is a story? We can use models like this to understand it. And when we ask ourselves, what is a digital story, we can take a new product and sort of test them against some of these older models to get a better sense of whether or not we are conveying information more effectively, or if we're just playing with shiny new tools, right? Did I already do this? All right. So John did a really interesting exercise in our seminar that I kind of wanted to recreate here, right? He presented us with a one-line story, right? Similar to something like this. I traveled around the world a year and only felt lost when I arrived home, right? Sounds kind of like one of those things you might see on Pinterest, or one of those things that like you go to Target and it's printed on one of those like poster board things to buy and hang up in a 12-year-old bedroom or whatever. But let's think about what's being presented here. Can we map this onto a structure like Damon Knight's tent pole method or Freytag's pyramid? Is there an exposition, rising action, climax, denouement in this story? This is the part where you get to talk. What do you think?
Arguably, yeah.
Well, argue it. Arguably, yeah.
I mean, I traveled around the world. It's kind of leading up a year and only felt lost. So you got the feeling of loss. It's kind of like the climax.
Yep.
Yep.
And then the following action until I got home.
Right. And so it's an abbreviated story, but we can still see how the core elements of exposition, climax, denouement really do map into that simple sentence, right? And if we try the tent pole method, we have the character of I, right? What do we know about that I? What do we know from our brief little story?
Traveling a year.
The I is a traveler, right? What do travelers do? Why are they traveling?
Looking for happiness.
Sure. Travelers travel because probably they're looking for something or they're trying to get somewhere, right? And so, you know, where does this I travel? What's our setting?
The world.
The world, right? All around. And, you know, what kind of emotion do we have in our story? What was the climax we identified?
Lost. Feeling
Lost. It's not really an emotion, but it kind of is. When you feel lost, you feel some range of sadness, anxiety, you know, apathy, anything, right? And so, but then the conflict we have is what? Where does that character feel lost?
Coming home.
Coming home, which is, you know, the inherent sort of conflict of, but I'm not supposed to feel this way in this space. And so once we pull all of those things together, some kind of a theme emerges. I don't know what we would call that theme. Any ideas?
Denouement.
Say it.
Denouement.
Okay, that's our theme.
I think so.
All right, sure.
Wanderlust.
Wanderlust, yeah.
Wanderlust. Okay, yeah, sure.
Self-discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
The
now,
downsides of traveling.
so what we just did was we sort of did this litmus test of saying like, okay, is this a story? And by the metrics that I've presented, we can now say, yes, it has the things that make it a story. So John would say, all right, we've identified some of these things. Now, are we emphasizing them the way that we want to? And how can digital tools help us emphasize them more effectively? So let's talk about setting. This is an easy one. How can we emphasize the setting of this story?
What's the setting?
I heard image, right? Did you say image?
Yeah.
Of what?
Photographs of places.
Photographs of places. Sure. So how do you represent the world? Well, you can represent it visually by iconic places that a world traveler might visit. What else could we emphasize in this story?
Image of what might a lost person look like, or
Sure.
facial expression, or
Sure. And so an image of what a lost person might look like, why would we show that kind of image? What are we trying to emphasize with facial expression specifically?
Emotion.
Pathos, emotion, right? Trying to have your reader or your user or visualizer, whoever, have some kind of sympathetic response, right? And faces are very good ways to encourage sympathy, right? And so what we're doing is sort of going part by part and asking, is this the best way to create an effect on my reader, right? And so the original iteration that I found the story, oh, already did that, wait. Okay, the original iteration looked like this, right? It was pasted onto this kind of image. So already, this is a digital story. It's a very basic digital story because it's just one image to supplement the text, right? So if we really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, we can ask specifically, what ways can we interact with our reader, right? So we talked about visual, right? We can provide pictures of where did they go, right? How can we impact our reader on an auditory level? What sounds might they hear with a story like this?
Foreign languages.
Foreign languages, yeah, that's great. What better way to convey a sense of travel than hearing things that you're not used to hearing in a place like home, right? Now we can get even more sort of digital. What about haptic or tactile? How can we make our reader feel, you know, a story like this? Any ideas? Yeah.
It said on Stuffworks that it's not compatible with video game remotes. Sometimes when you're fighting opponents, you like have a vibration, or if you've stumbled upon a cool chest, it vibrates or moves in some way.
Yeah, sure. And so vibration is a good way to think about tactile. And then what you were getting at with the idea of video games could be a way to make a story interactive, right? This sort of checklist is a way to ask yourself questions about how to create experiences other than just reading. So, for instance, one of the things we talked about in one of the tools that Allyson mentioned gets at the idea of a locative narrative, right? Emphasizing the place of the character or the reader specifically. So an example that John went over with us was an app on your phone where you only had access to a particular part of the story if the GPS recognized that you were in a specific location. So part of the story experience was physically being present in the setting or with a character or something like that. You have all these other crazy things to think about, right? How can you make the experience immersive or geospatial or temporal, right? Let's think about that. How long did our character travel the world?
A year.
So how do you convey the idea of a year? Oh man, this is about to be a Broadway song, huh? How do you convey the idea of a year with digital tools? How do you do that? I mean, how would you do that, let's say, in a text-based medium?
It's a calendar, like you can do visually, like a calendar flipping over, like
Sure.
you do in movies.
Sure. You could do a calendar flipping, right? That's an image. What about, what are some ways maybe we could slow our reader down or our user down? How do we make them feel like a year is going by?
Show the changing of the seasons.
The seasons.
Changing the seasons, sure. What about a way that they have to progress through the story by physically sifting through photographs or moving through files so it actually takes them time to move through the story? So they actually have this almost kinesthetic response to what you're trying to show them, right? These are storytelling techniques that we can think of that are made possible by the tools that we have access to. So that's kind of what digital storytelling is getting at. Does that make sense? Cool. Now this is what I want to show you. Who's seen the infamous bunny video? Oh, this is a DHSI classic, so I hope the sound works. This is one of John's examples of student work from the DHSI seminar of a digital storytelling project. So, and I love it. So we're gonna watch it.
From the dawn of time, the rabbit has been a powerful symbol for humans,
Very
both
quiet.
fertility and the degradation, a constant presence.
Are we sure this is as loud as it goes?
That's as I've worked on it. I'm sending a message. I've already sent a message to.
Can anybody hear it at all?
I can hear it.
All right,
Just a little
let's
bit.
all be quiet
Okay.
and listen.
Sure.
Breathe.
It's like 7 minutes. It's good. Let's be long quiet.
It's a long quiet.
I can send it out.
Well, let's say a little bit more,
All right,
because
a
it's
little
worth
bit
it.
more. Okay. A little bit more.
Human imaginary. from ancient India to ancient Greece, through the Middle Ages, the rabbit inhabits recorded history. All that time the spirit of the great rabbit was watching over future generations. The Middle Ages were tough for the rabbit. It nevertheless fought back.
Yeah, things like this.
All right, so like I said, it's going to be much more fun when you can hear it and immerse yourself. But this is an example of one, something that I think is very funny and I want you to enjoy, but two, a more classic idea of a kind of documentary style digital storytelling experience, very reliant on audio-visual, right? And we can do more, but also, let's not forget, this is awesome. So I will send that out so that we all have access. Briefly, I wanted to talk to you about the project that I did in this seminar. I can't share it with you, unfortunately, for reasons that will become apparent in my story. But I talked to John about this project that I wanted to do. And being the story-first guy that he is, when I said, hey, I've got this idea for a hypertextual experience that could be hosted on a website where you click on the individual keys of a piano and it takes you to different snippets of a story. His response was like, huh, well that's a good idea. You can do that in PowerPoint. And so I'm thinking like, okay, well that's not like quite as sexy as like building a website and doing all of this stuff. But true to his nature, John, again, very much story first, and wants us to think about how to use tools that we have access to and tools that we use routinely, but in a different way, right? And so, just briefly, I can't show you because the way my process worked was I built this whole thing on PowerPoint. You know, ideally would click on individual keys. It would take you to audio files and tell you snippets and show you images, and that was great until the very end when you clicked on a key and it crashed PowerPoint. So I learned a valuable lesson about iteration in digital storytelling and how you need to be flexible. So I intentionally made the end experience for my user the crashing of PowerPoint. That was the end of the story, right? And a little meta and a little cheeky, sure, but I didn't want to have to put you through that. Also, it's hosted on my computer, and if I did it here, sound, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of an idea of what I did, combining some of the elements we just talked about, hypertextuality, audio-visual, using tools that you're familiar with for unfamiliar purposes, right? So how can reimagining storytelling help us reimagine pedagogy? So let's talk for a second just about first-year composition. Right now, these are the three major projects that we teach our freshmen: an annotated bibliography, a literature review that is often called a historiography, and a thesis-driven argument, right? All text-based, all pretty traditional forms of argument or communication or research, right? So digital storytelling concepts would encourage us to ask, what new forms could these products take? And so the reason I wanted to tell you a little bit about my project, the Patience of the Piano Tuner with the individual keys, is it occurred to me that a traditional annotated bibliography is fine when you only have 6 sources per se, you know, and you print it out and it's in alphabetical order and you turn it in, right? But what if we reconceptualize the idea of an annotated bibliography to conform more to how we experience things like internet archives? And we asked our students to organize an annotated bibliography in a more hypertextual format that allows them to organize sources by topic instead of by some almost arbitrary formatting concerns, right? What if we, did more with multimodal AV presentations, right, as they do in 1102, right? What about integrated collaborative e-portfolios, right? These are just some ideas for how to rethink what we teach in the product sense, less the process sense. And of course, if the idea is to focus on the process of research literacy, developing arguments, incorporating evidence, it really shouldn't matter if our products conform to more traditional, traditional annotated bibliographies or text-based documents what should matter is what the students are learning and if those end goals are being achieved. So are the products we require the best at promoting the skills we desire? That's a question. Are they the most appropriate products to reflect the writing lives of our students? And I think that anyone who's doing work in multimodality, in composition, or any other field would begin to say, no, they're not. Our students write all the time, but not in this way, right? So to kind of wrap up, for me, DHSI was a vacation, a learning experience, and time to reflect on pedagogy. And that is my digital story. So now,
You always ask.
that's my favorite. Now we can ask some meaty questions.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Okay, why don't we have the speakers come back up to the front, and then we can have a discussion and any questions, and maybe even talk about tools and use, you know, some of the pieces of equipment in front of you, if you want to.
Speaking about changing pedagogy, we, or actually Barbara Lewis, had an experience working with students where we took a traditional course and we completely changed it. We introduced a lot of new software so the students could tell the same story but use these software, and then we thought this is just going to be great. They're the digital generation. They're just going to just be all over this. And that's not what happened. So a lot of fear, I thought this was a writing course. How do you guys, as teachers, as instructors, how are you going to deal with that? And have you experienced that already?
You got anything for that?
Well, I think that in our FOC classes, we're already using some digital tools. So I think of My Reviewers. I think most of us in here are familiar with My Reviewers. And so there is some hesitation from students, both younger students and non-traditional students, at that concern. And so the way that I've approached it with My Reviewers, as I would with any other tool, is that we're going to have to learn things that are frightening or uncomfortable for us in all sorts of places. What a great experience to have a safe space where we can try to play around. And then I try to give them in-class time to practice and play with those tools. So that way there is someone to maybe offer suggestions or guidance, sandbox time.
One thing I would add is currently I'm working on kind of a pilot course in the FYC 1101 that experiments more with collaborative writing. And so I realized going in that there's many tools out there to facilitate that sort of thing, but I didn't want my students to focus all their time on having to learn new tools. I wanted them to focus on the same sort of writing goals that would be in any other class, but with kind of one variable. So I think one bit of advice, and the reason someone like John would always say story first, is because you can get so bogged down learning all these tools and then never actually produce anything. And so like in this class, we're keeping it simple, and I'm teaching them the values of Google Drive and sharing docs and how to write on a doc at the same time, and it's blowing their minds.
Just to kind of follow up on that one, I think we knew the professor that we were working with got excited about all the different, that's cool, that's cool, I want to use this. And I think we knew going in that it was going to be overwhelming. And I'm actually working with another faculty member on another class this semester, and what we're doing is the first half of the class is them doing the research and writing a paper, a regular, so that's their comfort zone and everything. And then the second half of the class is going to be teaching them two or three different tools that they could use, and then they're going to take that story that they wrote and convert it into 2 other formats. So it's how do I reconceptualize my story in a different way? How do I think about the fact that my audience isn't always going to be the same, and that different delivery methods for my story are important. So that's another idea too.
That sounds like a great activity to reconceptualize one piece several ways. Yes.
So when it comes to like accessibility and kind of assessment in general, there are tools, of course, that students do have to buy potentially, or there might be some that are free. When it comes to assessing it, how do you set up a rubric if you're letting students have free reign on the tools? That is fair and just to each when one's using PowerPoint and one's using like iMovie.
Can you give an example of like a particular project? Because I think
Like if we gave them free reign on the third project for ENC 1102,
sure. So
use whatever tool that you want in video, movie, digital storytelling in order to complete this project. I mean, how would you set up a rubric so that the teacher keeps his sanity?
Well,
that you can grade all of these on a justified scale.
I think the simple answer is you wouldn't want to go too far out of the realm of the rubric that's already put in place, because while they may be producing something in a different mode or a different product, the concepts of what you've been working on all semester, of how to engage an audience, right? How to incorporate evidence, how to back your argument, it really doesn't matter the genre of iMovie or PowerPoint or podcast, right? Those argumentative techniques should be the same. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like I've read things about like statements of goals and choices, additional assignments, so that the students can explain why they did what they did and things like that.
That's what I would add on to, is to definitely have some sort of meta document asking the students to understand their own process. That way, if they've struggled with the tool, then they can talk through what that process was like, and they can assess that. So as they deal with the tool in the future, then they have a better understanding of how they're thinking.
I think even John mentioned when he teaches digital storytelling classes, wasn't he saying that he asks his students to do a writing contract? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it allows the students to sort of set those goals and, in some ways evaluate their own work.
Right, so it's a lot of self-evaluation. I think he also mentioned he has his students as a class develop a rubric together for how they would like to be assessed. So, John, I saw your hand, and then I saw you, Dr. Jones.
So I see a lot of creative writing teachers in here. So how would you suggest that we incorporate some type of digital into, say, a fiction class?
I'm ready for this question. I've been thinking about this forever. So I would again structure the class story. So the last unit or the last project then is that digital one. So we have all the good storytelling skills going into our final project, spending that last unit, maybe 6 weeks on a digital project, letting them sandbox time with the different tools. So that way they have the story build up, but then they also have the exploratory time. I was thinking specifically for fiction.
So let me follow up. At what level would you think that you would incorporate that? So like in a form and technique class, or would you wait until they were at a second or third level where the craft of writing was already more well defined, or would you be willing to put it in like a form and technique class?
I think you're never too young to start at least experimenting. Then you might make the schedule a bit longer as you advance through different courses. Especially if you're reading assignments in the form and tech class, you're offering them examples of what's possible. I'm thinking specifically of that story online that Jared shows, the interactive story, then teaching that before turning them over. So giving them more and more examples before offering that.
One thing to consider too is, I don't know how the form and technique classes are structured per se, but a lot of the creative writing textbooks are broken down into elements like plot structure, dialogue, setting, point of view. And so if you go through individual aspects like that and then add on to the end, okay, we've talked about how this works in text, how could you reconceptualize this in more of a digital means? Similarly, I think in your class, right, they're studying works of literature as well, or stories as examples, right? And so one exercise could simply be, how could you reimagine this as a digital story? Those are just things to think about.
Dr. Jones?
I was just going to respond to the question raised earlier about the students' anxiety about the technology, the myth of the digital native and all that. And I think one thing this won't work for every student, but for those who are up to it, it helps sometimes to just make it okay to focus on the limitations of the platform and the technology. So that can even be thematized sometimes as part. So getting into the concept of glitches, or where platforms break or technology frustrates us, or that can become sort of self-consciously part of what they're doing, and that can be liberating because then they don't have to have a neatly timed package, everything working like a black box, right, impressing everybody. So it's the difference between sort of making a really impressive AAA, sort of video game that looks realistic, And then they realize, well, maybe sometimes just a kind of retro 8-bit game that has humor involved using one of these available online engines can be even more productive because it allows you to be self-conscious about the limitations of the medium. So it's not just making that part of what you, it's like teaching the conflict.
Right.
And making it fit.
It's not why Minecraft got big.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm especially curious, Allyson, about the poem that you were presenting with Stepworks. What do you guys think are the advantages and disadvantages of having your reader or your audience see only part of the text at once? Like in the case of that poem, like a few words of what might be a poem, like so.
Sure. So one of the disadvantages that I think of immediately is that you don't get to see the text all at once, so you're not quite sure where the ending is going to be.
Right.
So I think that would be the biggest disadvantage with that. But then the advantage is that you get to experience it over and over in a way that you might not be able to visually, because you might change the pace at which you click, in the way that you might change the pace at which you read. But there's a lot more experimentation, at least in the way I've set up this.
And do you also feel like maybe there's an advantage in sort of unsettling that expectation that you know where the end is? Like you don't actually know kind of what you're getting into when you start?
I think so, absolutely. And so one of my suggestions that I would offer for teachers of literature, especially if you're teaching poetry and you're teaching meter, use software like this to help students practice breaking up meter and thinking about the way words sound together. It's a great exercise for poets to practice putting sounds together as well.
One thing I thought of when you presented it was just how it really does sort of teach the importance of enjambment, right? And the idea of focusing very specifically on why this line, why these words together, and isolate it from something else. But I can see how that could be a drawback as well, but very powerful.
Right. It's a way to close study some of our texts. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
What else?
Well, if there are no other comments or questions, let me just close by saying that the USF is a partner member of DHSI now, and we sort of, Spencer gave us a preview of the list of courses that are available for next June. For those of you in the English department, we will be asking for proposals very soon to see who might want to go on with a scholarship of, one of the slots we have, but then $1,000 travel fellowship from the department. And I haven't talked to my group of faculty yet about when we're going to do that. But since Emily organize it last year, she's sitting right here. I can put her on the spot and suggest that maybe we should start that within the next week or so. Get out an announcement and have you guys that are interested send in that, and we will be selecting people who can do that. Also, do know that there are scholarships available from DHSI and also, for beyond our free slots, we do have a discount for people who want to go and have funding or can get funding for the travel expenses beyond what we can extend for our few. So please think about it, spread the word, come to the next 2 more panels, or I don't know, one of the rooms we have is smaller than this one, so we won't be able to have it.
Yeah, we may have to look for another space.
Thank you very much, both of you. It was beautiful.